Right.
Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, uh, August 29th, 2024, with Ralph Carhart. Ralph has a book out. The previous meeting, we spoke with Josh Rawich from the Hall, and this is a book which I think many of you will find very interesting, called The Hall Ball. We're going to get to Ralph in a few minutes. Just want to go over some housekeeping. Everybody should have received the giant newsletter I sent out a couple of days ago. I have since changed around a couple of dates and added a few dates. Bottom line is, I will send that out, just a couple and a couple of add-ons. But we are good until January 1st, 2025. So
Oh.
a lot of great guests going to be speaking and addressing the group. So Mars has something quick he wants to share with you. Mars, please take the floor. Come on, Mars, you're always talking. Now I'm giving you the stage.
Well, I got to unmute. I don't know what happens here. Now uh, hold on.
We can hear you, Mars.
You can hear me. Okay. Well, I had taken several photographs of the field since they opened it up. And so, how I've been campaigning. I'm probably not the one that initially came up with the idea, but I don't know that for a fact. But anyway, I made from my vendor, Custom Ink in Texas, I made a Willie Mays Field T-shirt in large print above the image, and in tiny print, I simply put photo from Mars. I've made 3 different shirts. I made a long sleeve, comes in short sleeve, comes in white, comes in black. They're basically around $30, and I don't want to make any profit from it at all. If anybody's interested in ordering them, they call the vendor. I tell the vendor that I give permission for all our club members to buy a shirt where it could be shipped directly to them, and of course they pay for their own shirt. So if anybody's interested, all they have to do is let me know. Then I call the vendor after Labor Day and tell them the scenario that there's certain members in our club that are interested. They're going to call you directly, and I give permission to give up the copyright for our members.
Will we
Anybody,
get
anybody need anybody needs any more information, they can contact me and I'll forward you Mars's information.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gary.
No problem.
And you could see the image when Gary focuses. I have one shirt that was taken from the upper deck, another taken from the lower deck. The one that I sent to Gary was the one I just took about a week ago at a day game with the players on the field. So, you have choices. So just let Gary know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mars. One
Thank
other
you.
thing regarding emails. There are over 500 people in this address book, so there are times when people send me this stuff and they ask me to send it out. I'm basically can only do 2 mass emails a day before I get a rejection letter. So just keep that in mind. Doesn't mean I don't want to help who's ever sending me out stuff. So Richard, for example, sent me out that mail out stuff, and I needed to wait till today to finally mail it. It has nothing to do with Richard. It's just the other stuff came first, and that's just how it is. So 3 health issues I want to talk about. This weekend at Oracle is autism awareness. Autism Speaks. Will Clark, of course, one of our great Zoom guests we had. If you want to help him out in his cause, you can send a donation to Autism Speaks. Another one of our members, Ed Randall, he has the Fans for the Cure for Prostate Cancer. I sent out stuff regarding that as well. If you want to make a donation, another great cause. And if you don't want to make a donation, just get yourself checked. He's helped save thousands of lives. He goes to baseball games and has the test right there. And finally, on a health scene, John Burbage one of our group members, is going out to San Francisco. His niece, 40 years ago, had a heart transplant. Great story about her. She's going to be in the Alaskan Airlines section at Oracle Park, and John will be there with her. If you want to go say hi to John, that'd be great. Our next meeting will be September 12th with John Leonidakis. He'll be speaking, giving us an update on his Left Ear Dual project, and also talking about Arnold Hano, A Decade in the Bleachers, a movie that he made a few years ago. When I say a few, I mean probably 10, 12. He spoke live about it, and Arnold came, and it was fabulous, and it's worth seeing again. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn over the program to professor at Queens College and author, Ralph Carhart. Ralph, welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
I appreciate it. I am speaking to you all from an apartment on 151st Street in Manhattan, just a few blocks from the John T. Brush stairwell and the Polo Grounds housing project. I'm very, 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 very close. So I figured all of you gentlemen would appreciate knowing that. Gary, can I share the screen?
Absolutely. Hold on a second.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm gonna actually just begin the program by reading the prologue of the book. How many of you have actually heard of the Hall Ball before today? Any of you? Okay, a couple of you. I assume most people don't. So when I do these, I usually start at the beginning so that everyone knows what the story is. Stand by. Let me get this properly up. Okay. Now you're all seeing a thing that looks like a slideshow, right?
Yes.
All right, great. So here's the prologue, which gives you the background of the story of the Hall Ball. And then then we'll go from there. For Christmas of 2009, my father-in-law, Bob Peterson, gave my wife, Anna, and me a self-made book he had been compiling for some time. It was a history of his family line on his mother's side that went back to the 1400s. Among other revelations, it proved how Anna is a first cousin, 14 times removed, of William Shakespeare. Those who know me know that my sacred trinity consists of the 3 Bs: baseball, the Beatles, and the Bard. I had married into literary royalty. My curiosity whetted, I began to dig into my own family history, and before I knew it, I was embroiled in a full-blown obsession. I had spent countless hours poring over documents and photos, trying to find out as much as I could about family centuries dead. This meant, as any genealogist could tell you, spending an inordinate amount of time in cemeteries. As a child, cemeteries simultaneously fascinated and terrified me. As an adult, I had spent little time in them until the spring of 2010. As soon as the thaw began, I was taking every available opportunity to visit the graves of my ancestors, both recent and ancient. A rubbing of the stone of my great ×8 Aunt Mary Carhart now hangs in my living room, her death date of 1737, clear and easy to read. I grew to truly love cemeteries. They are quiet and green, and rarely are there any other people around there to interfere with my enjoyment of them. Cemeteries are a place of introspection, and they often seem like a private park, just for me. The art of gravestones has evolved over the years, and the artist and historian within me appreciates the beauty of a well-designed monument, as well as the depth of information that can be gathered from one. Every time I discover the grave of someone to whom I am connected, a thrill shoots through me. Each relative is a treasure waiting to be discovered. Which brings me to our family vacation that summer. Having spent months researching my family, who were more local to our native New York City, we decided to spend a few weeks looking into Anna's kin. In addition to Shakespeare, Anna is a direct descendant of William Bradford, the original governor of the Plymouth colony. The descendants of the Bradfords left Plymouth and spread throughout New England, and we spent 14 days tracking them down with one small side trip. 2 years earlier, we had been in Cooperstown, New York during the Major League Baseball All-Star break, and we were fortunate enough to catch the game at the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Every year, the Hall sponsors an All-Star Gala. They show the game in their grandstand theater while they give away hot dogs, sodas, and snacks. There's trivia, contests, and games in between innings. The Midsummer Classic had begun to lose some of its luster for me in recent years, and this opportunity to spend a little extra time in the hall after hours had helped to recapture the magic. We had a blast that first time and decided in 2010 to divert from our genealogical
We're
road
good.
to try
We're
and
good
catch
now.
lightning in a
Okay.
bottle again.
Thanks, Hakeem.
The night before the game, we were early for our dinner reservations, and Anna suggested we check out the local cemetery. Neither of us were aware of any family from that area, but it had become habit. The closest was Lakewood Cemetery on the southeastern coast of Otsego Lake. Lakewood is built into a steep hill that seems to wind up into eternity. The most notable name to be associated with the cemetery is the writer, James Fenimore Cooper. Interestingly, the giant monument honoring the native son, whose own ancestors gave the town its name, is a cenotaph, an empty tomb erected to honor an individual who was buried elsewhere. Cooper's actually buried in Christ Churchyard, about 2 blocks from the Hall of Fame at the heart of town. Lakewood is also the final resting place of Emmett Littleton Ashford, the first African-American to umpire a Major League Baseball game. He accomplished that feat in 1966, almost 20 years after Jackie Robinson erased the color line for players. 15 years before that, in 1951, he became the first Black umpire in organized baseball. His was a life of breaking barriers. Ashford went on to a mildly successful acting career, appearing in the television show The Jacksons, a variety show hosted by the singer Michael Jackson and his multitude of siblings. He also appeared in the comedic film about life in the Negro Leagues, The Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars, and Motor Kings. He died in Marina del Rey, California, but felt so connected to the town that had become the spiritual home of baseball that his wife sent his ashes to the hall, where they were eventually interred in this jewel of a cemetery. Anna and I wandered through the seemingly endless rows of this fascinating collection of New Yorkers, looking for familial names that we had trained our eyes to find. Instead of Carhart or Peterson, however, Anna found Doubleday, Abner Doubleday. At first, we believed we had found the mythical inventor of baseball. We quickly realized that this Abner died in 1812, making it impossible for him to be the Civil War hero who was wrongfully credited as the progenitor of the game. This Abner was instead the grandfather of the famous one. We searched for a while looking for our Abner, but with no luck. I later learned he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, but in the end, it didn't matter that he wasn't there. The door had been opened. I had seen the name of baseball's Odin written in stone in the town that the game had adopted as its birthplace. One obsession was about to give way to another. The next night, we arrived at the hall early so we could enjoy the museum before the All-Star game started. The seed of the idea that was planted the evening before bloomed into the foundation of a quest when I walked through the hall's famous plaque gallery. It had never occurred to me before then how much the visually striking plaques resembled tiny tombstones. Of course, I was looking at them with a different set of eyes than I ever had previously. I looked at row upon row of the greatest, most influential individuals to touch the game over its history and decided then and there that I was going to visit the graves of each and every one of them. My love of baseball and my newfound love of cemeteries had fused into a single quest. I was going to absorb the history of the game in a whole new way, one Hall of Famer at a time. As soon as we returned home from vacation, I began my research, and Google quickly introduced me to Stu Thornley. It turned out that Stu seemed to have the same love for cemeteries and baseball, and had already gone on a similar journey. He'd created a website complete with photographs and rough GPS coordinates of all of the Hall of Famer graves to that point. This was good news for me, It meant that I had all the location information I needed to get started. Plus, the photos made it easier to find the graves themselves once I actually got to the cemeteries. It was also frustrating. I had thought my idea was original, and to know that it had already been done was discouraging. I had worked in theater for 25 years, and I had always desired for my art to be unique. I was already beginning to think of the endeavor as an artistic one, though the actual manifestation of that art remained vague in my mind. Still, I needed to own this idea in some way and began to think of variations that could make it mine. While I was contemplating that dilemma, I was able to get a healthy head start on the whole thing simply by luck of location. My first stop was right over the Verrazano Bridge in Brooklyn, at perhaps the most famous cemetery in all of New York City. Greenwood is well known both for its size and beauty. Some of its more famous residents include Leonard Bernstein, Samuel Morse, Boss Tweed, who once was a partial investor in a baseball club, and Charles Ebbets, owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers. There is even a book titled Baseball's Legends of Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery, written by Peter J. Nash, formerly known as Prime Minister Pete Nice of the rap trio Third Base. There are over 200 former major leaguers buried there, along with 51 Carharts. There is only one Hall of Famer, though, but he's one of my favorites. Henry Chadwick is the only member of the Hall whose election was primarily based on his work as a writer. There is, of course, the J.G. Taylor Spink Award that is given annually to a baseball scribe, but contrary to popular misconception, a Spink recipient is not a Hall of Famer.
Oh.
Chadwick is in the Hall itself. As someone who appreciates the artistic inspiration that comes from baseball, I have always had a soft spot in my heart for the British-born writer. At the impressive main gates, Gothic spires that reach to the sky, maps of the massive cemetery were available, which clearly marked the location of Chadwick. Minutes after my arrival, I was standing at my first Hall of Fame grave. It is one of the most celebratory graves I have ever seen. The sight of 3 baseballs left behind like religious offerings made my smile wider. I considered them briefly, and in one of those moments of perfect clarity, I realized a way I could make my tour of the graves different from Stu's. I wasn't going to make the trip on my own. I was going to bring a baseball with me, a special baseball that I was going to photograph at each of the sites. I was going to create my own artifact, and I knew just the ball I wanted to use. On the trip to Cooperstown, when we found Grandpa Abner, Anna and I had gone to Doubleday Field to watch a game. Doubleday is a small ballpark located on a piece of land that was once a farmer's pasture. The field had been used for baseball for decades when, in 1939, the year the hall opened, the current steel, concrete, and brick structure was constructed as a WPA project. The result remains a centerpiece of the village today. When you watch a game at Doubleday, you feel like you've traveled in time. It is small and unfettered by modern baseball ballpark conveniences. The electric scoreboard is the kind my high school used in the 1980s, with a series of incandescent light bulbs forming the numerals. The park doesn't even have any lighting. All games at Doubleday Field are day games. This is actually no longer true. They did a huge renovation project at Doubleday Field, and now there's actually lights and a nicer scoreboard. And my book is now out of date. On this particular day, Anna and I were sitting in the back row of the grandstand, giving us a view of Willow Brook, the small stream that runs next to the park. Anna noticed a baseball sitting in the water and went down to fish it out. This was the ball I wanted for the project. After all, this ball had come from Cooperstown, giving it a Hall of Fame pedigree. Of course, between having spent an unknown amount of time in the water, which smudged the green manufacturer logo, this was not a ball that one might expect for a major league project. Made by Diamond, the ball was for their NFHS line and intended for use in high school games. But to me, these defects lent to the character. The only problem was I couldn't find it. I could have sworn it was somewhere in the car, but after pulling out all of our camping gear, still sitting in our trunk in anticipation of another upcoming trip, I gave up and grabbed another ball that was sitting in the back seat. It was an even worse shape, brown and scuffed from a game of catch that took place on concrete. I took a Sharpie out of the glove compartment, briefly considered how I was going to mark the ball to make it clear that each photograph was of the same one, and quickly scribbled the Hall ball. It wasn't profound, but there it was. I placed the ball on one of the more interesting features of Chadwick's grave. I took my photo and set off on the next stop of the tour. By the time the day was over, I had succeeded in reaching only 6 of the 9 graves I had set out to see. I was also thoroughly frustrated by the fact that the time I had spent was wasted because it wasn't really the ball I wanted to use. By twilight, I had decided I was going to need to revisit everywhere I had gone that day, this time with the proper ball. I also still felt the need to differentiate my quest in another way from Stu's besides the ball. Despite my standing at the feet of some of the biggest names in the history of the game that day, inspiration had not come. A few days later, as I was finishing the packing for the camping trip, I found the ball. It had been in the trunk the whole time, buried in the large canvas duffel that also contained our sleeping bags and the poles for our tent. I knew I was right in choosing this ball as soon as I placed my fingers upon it. With the same lightning clarity that came at Chadwick's grave when I touched the ball, I had an epiphany. Why stop with taking the ball to the graves of the dead Hall of Famers? Why not also bring it to the living ones? And there it was, my quest in full. This ball was going to be either at the graves or in the hands of every member of the Hall of Fame. It would unite the rich history of the game in a way that would be unique, bringing Alexander Cartwright, the firstborn member of the Hall, together with heroes who wouldn't even be crowned at the time the adventure began. Almost simultaneously, I realized that if I, an artist, made such a treasure, I would not want it to languish on the shelves of my office. I want people to see my work. I don't direct a play so that the actors can entertain me at home. Like all artists, I want an audience. There was no better place for such a creation to be seen than the Hall of Fame. I would donate the ball to the Hall, to their permanent collection. There, it could be seen by at least 250,000 people annually. I had grandiose thoughts of the Hall continuing the tradition after I gave it to them, taking photographs of the new inductees every year, making it a true artifact that would outlive me. I was certainly putting the cart before the horse. I had no realistic concept of how long it would take me to do all of the travel, nor how I was going to get access to the living players. But this was a day of inspiration, not logistics. I had no idea at the time just how far that inspiration would take me. That's the prologue. And where inspiration took me was to 34 states, Puerto Rico, and Cuba twice. I had to go back to Cuba a second time because of a story that normally at this point when I do these things, I tell the story of Negro Leaguer Cristobal Torriente and his body that seems to be buried in 2 different places. But I have been told that y'all are would most appreciate New York Giants stuff. So what I have instead done is created a slideshow of the guys, the graves of the guys who were primarily New York Giants. I narrowed it down to like 20 names. Can everyone see Mickey Walsh here?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Smiling Mickey Welch.
Smile, Mickey Welsh. So I've gone through and I made a little slideshow of the 20 New York most prominent New York Giants, and I'm gonna read those sections of the book to you, so that you can get a little background and you can admire the graves of these guys, and then we can chat about anything that you might notice about the graves of these guys. Sometimes you'll get a twofer. As I tell you the story of Mickey Walsh, you're also going to get Wee Willie Keeler. Does anybody know why you're going to get both of them?
Because they were buried in the same cemetery.
They were buried in the same cemetery. In fact, they were buried in the same cemetery as maybe Cristobal Torriente. We don't know. But that cemetery is Calvary Cemetery in Long Island City, New York. Wee Willie Keeler and Mickey Welch are buried in prestigious Calvary in Queens. Frequently used by filmmakers, Calvary served as the location for Don Corleone's funeral in The Godfather. Massive, there are over 3 million souls buried at Calvary, making it the largest cemetery by interments in the nation. If Calvary were a city, it would be the third highest population in America, trailing only Los Angeles and New York City itself. While not carrying as much cachet as Greenwood, it is still a pretty fancy place to be buried. The entirety of Welch's career took place in the 19th century, while Keeler's straddled the gap into the modern era. They were both on the roster of the 1892 New York Giants. It was Keeler's first season and Welch's final. The elder gentleman appeared in only one game that year, surrendering 9 runs in a single 5-inning appearance before deciding to hang up his spikes after winning 307 games in 13 seasons. Keeler batted .341 lifetime, including a hefty .424 in 1897. He is best known for summing up the secret to successful hitting by proclaiming, "Keep your eye clear and hit 'em where they ain't," to Brooklyn Eagle sports writer Abe Yeager. It took another 5 years after I took their picture for me to discover there's possibly a third Hall of Famer buried in Calvary, a fact unknown to the world at that point. More on him later. Cristobal Torriente is there. If you actually were so interested and had a subscription to the New York Times, if you were to Google Ralph Carhart Hall of Fame Calvary Cemetery, a story would come up that the New York Times did about Cristobal Torriente and my quest to find him. When the New York Times did that story, they actually, I thought he was buried here in Calvary near Walsh and Keeler. And then I was contacted by a Cuban filmmaker who said, no, we have him here in Cuba. And that's why I had to go back a second time. All right, next of our New York Giants tour, Monty Ward. John Montgomery Ward, who's buried at Greenfield Cemetery in Uniondale, New York. Those two gentlemen, by the way, Mickey Welch and John Montgomery Ward, those are the only two significant New York Giants who were buried in New York. Ward is in Uniondale, Long Island. John Montgomery Ward was a rarity in baseball in many ways. During his early career, from 1878 to 1884, he was a premier pitcher for the Providence Grays, leading the league in wins in 1879 with 47. As his pitching skills diminished from overuse, he moved to the infield and specialized in stolen bases, stealing 111 in 1887. A graduate of Columbia Law School, he was an early force in the world of player labor movement. Of the player labor movement. Ward helped create the short-lived Players League in 1890 and represented them in court in their fight for labor and equality. A complicated man, later in life, he used his law degree to support baseball management, arguing in favor of the reserve clause, which he had earlier tried to destroy. His first wife, Helen Duvray, was a famed stage actress and loved baseball so much that she created the Duvray Cup, bestowed upon the winner of the 1880s incarnation of the World Series. Anyone know the story of the Duvray Cup? It went missing. I think Boston won it. The last year it was by Boston, and while it was in Boston, it went MIA. So it's one of those lost baseball treasures. Next is Bill Terry, who is buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Jacksonville, Florida. You're getting these stories in a pretty much chronological order of how I experienced them. That summer after we got back from the camping trip that I talked about, we then went down to Florida to visit some relatives. So I hit a bunch of the Florida graves while I was down there too. So you're getting these graves in kind of the order they took place. Bill Terry at Evergreen in Jacksonville. Bill Terry was a stalwart at first base for the New York Giants from 1923 to 1936. From 1927 until the end of his career, the eagle-eyed Terry never hit below .310. His crowning season was his 1930 campaign, when his 254 hits resulted in a .401 batting average. To this day, it remains the last .400 season in the National League. He followed his playing days with a successful managerial career, steering the Giants to 3 pennants and the World Championship in 1933, his first full season at the helm. Player-manager Terry hit .273 in that series and had a home run in the 4th inning of Game 6 to open up the scoring in an eventual 2-1 Giants victory. Next, George Davis. George had an unmarked grave for many, many years, and if you can read the stone, you'll see that in after he was elected to the Hall of Fame in 98, Sabre erected a stone in its place, which was sort of an inspiration to me, which I'll tell you all about later on. But George Davis is buried at Fernwood Cemetery in Fernwood, Pennsylvania. 5 of the 6 Hall of Famers buried in Philadelphia and its suburbs made their mark before the so-called golden age of the 1950s. George Davis played for 3 different teams, but had his finest years from 1893 to 1901 with the New York Giants. In that time, he never hit below 300. He was elected by the Veterans Committee in 1998, 50 years after his death, and sports an informative stone installed by the now-defunct George Davis chapter of the Society for American Baseball Research, which represented northeastern New York, where he was born. The marker was placed soon after his induction to the Hall. Davis died in a mental asylum due to the effects of syphilis, and his wife did not mark his grave at the time. His fate was unknown until 1968, more than a quarter century after he died, and was only uncovered by the detective work of Hall of Fame historian Lee Allen. There were a lot of stories along the way of ball players whose graves were unnoticed or unmarked, even after they were elected to the Hall. Now, all of those, interestingly enough, what do you think unified all of the unmarked graves of Hall of Famers? Does anyone have a guess?
Oh.
They were all Negro Leaguers.
Ah, Lord.
So next on my journey, I'm still in Pennsylvania. Who's next? Who's next?
Christy Mathewson.
In Lewisburg Cemetery in Lewisburg, 3 hours west of Philadelphia, is the town of Lewisburg, home of Bucknell University. 43 attendees of Bucknell appear in the baseball reference database of major league players, but only Christy Mathewson is in the Hall of Fame. Mathewson, for his part, seemed rather fond of his alma mater, as he chose to be buried in its backyard. Within walking distance of Christy Mathewson Memorial Football Stadium, as well as Depew Baseball Field, Mathewson's grave highlights his military service and does not mention baseball. He is the only member of the Hall to die as a direct result of serving in the armed forces, his lungs seared by poison gas during a training exercise in World War I. The only Bucknell alum to appear in more major league games than Mathewson was Mickey Doolin, who appeared in 1,728 of them between 1905 and 1918, primarily for the Phillies. Doolin was a freshman in 1899, the same year Mathewson entered college, making the two likely teammates. Mickey played for the Bucknell Bisons until 1904. By 1901, Mathewson's school days were done. He dropped out and instead proceeded to win 373 regular season baseball games with a lifetime ERA of 2.13 and a WHIP of 1.058. He was one of the 5 selected to be a founding member of the Hall in 1936, along with Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Honus Wagner, and Walter Johnson. Almost 100 years after his death, Mathewson is still cited as one of the greatest pitchers of all time.
Damn straight.
And I mentioned how Mathewson's grave mentions his military service, but not baseball. That was extraordinarily common. If a Hall of Famer, even if a guy knew he was a Hall of Famer when he died and had the opportunity to say, hey, put Hall of Famer on my grave, he was much more likely to pick, hey, put I was a veteran on my grave. Almost universally. Next is Tim Keefe. And you get another twofer here of Tim Keefe and John Clarkson, because they're both buried at Cambridge Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Clarkson was also a member of the 1892 Bean Eaters, although his time playing with McCarthy and Duffy was brief. By midseason, he was released by Boston and signed on with the Cleveland Spiders. Clarkson won 328 games in his career, including a mind-boggling 53 in 1885, as well as another 49 in 1889 when he won the pitching Triple Crown, striking out 284 batters with a 2.73 ERA. Keefe, the final verifiable Irishman buried in the Boston area, is buried at Cambridge Cemetery in a plot not far from Clarkson. Keefe never played for a Boston squad, but instead was a darling of New York. In a career that began with the upstate Troy Trojans in 1880, He played for the American Association New York Metropolitans, the National League New York Giants, and the Players League New York Giants, before finishing in Philadelphia, playing 3 seasons for the Phillies. He retired in 1894 with a lifetime 342 wins and 2.63 ERA. From 1883 through 1888, he was one of the most successful and durable arms in the game, twice leading the league in wins, ERA, and innings pitched. Next is a fun little twofer thing. One sec. Yeah. Jim O'Rourke and Roger Connor, and I'll skip around. Because of its small, both of them are buried in Connecticut. Because of its small size, as well as the relatively limited number of Hall of Famers buried there, Connecticut marked the first time I conquered an entire state in a single day. Along with co-worker and fellow baseball fan Jeff Greenberg, I played hooky and left work early, spending the day taking a stroll through some of the more antiquated names in baseball history. Jim O'Rourke and Roger Connor made their mark prior to the 20th century. O'Rourke was an outfielder, catcher, and first baseman who had a lifetime batting average of .310. Connor was the greatest home run hitter in the history of the game, before Babe Ruth. The two men played together from 1885 to 1892, mostly with the National League New York Giants, although they both defected to the Players League team of the same name in 1890. When the league folded at the end of the season, they both returned to the NL incarnation, or O'Rourke for 2 more seasons and Connor for 1 more, before going off to Philadelphia in 1892, where 34-year-old Davis led the league in doubles, where the 34-year-old led the league in doubles. Like George Davis, Connor was another 19th century legend who was largely forgotten and lay in an unmarked grave until 2001, when the Waterbury Monuments Committee installed the one pictured. Let's see. Next, we go on to Illinois. Anyone know who might be in Illinois? You're going to get another twofer here. Freddie Lindstrom and Gabby Harnett are both buried at All Saints Cemetery in Des Plaines, Illinois. Freddie Lindstrom and Gabby Harnett, their careers were concurrent in the 1920s and 30s, but they played together for only a single season on the Cubs. Hartnett, born in Rhode Island, spent 19 years behind the plate for the Cubbies and was adopted by the city. Lindstrom only got to play for his native town in 1935 as his career was winding down. Lindstrom's grave bears no evidence of his baseball past. Hartnett's has a modest line engraved below the family name, but above the names of himself and his wife Martha, reading, "Entered Baseball Hall of Fame 1955. The visit to these 2 graves marked the only time I was accompanied on a hall ball trip by my father-in-law, Bob. Bob died not long after I finished the hall ball. I hope he understands how his genealogy bug, which introduced me to the greater purpose and possibilities of cemeteries, inadvertently made this odyssey possible. Next, we head to Maryland and John McGraw, who is buried in the same cemetery as Joe Kelly, Ned Hanlon, and Wilbert Robinson. All those old Orioles all kind of buried themselves near each other at New Cathedral Cemetery in Baltimore, which is the cemetery that has the most Hall of Famers with 4. It's possible, I have to double check, Kensico might be up to 4 at this point in Westchester, but at the time I was doing this, there were 4. This is the only, New Cathedral in Baltimore was the only one that had 4. Less than 5 miles from Camden Yards, home of the Orioles, is New Cathedral Cemetery. Besides being the only cemetery owned by the Archdiocese of Baltimore, it holds the unique distinction of being the location in which the most Hall of Famers are buried. There are 4 baseball greats located on its 125 acres, all connected deep in the marrow of Baltimore baseball. Ned Hanlon, Wilbert Robinson, Joe Kelly, and the incomparable John McGraw. The original Baltimore Orioles were founded in 1882 as part of the American Association, famously known as the Beer and Whiskey League, for their willingness to sell adult beverages at games, unlike the stodgy National League. Despite the extra concession sales, the league folded at the end of the 1891 season. The Orioles had been a successful enough franchise, though, that they were absorbed into the expanded National League It was in this 1892 season that these four men came together. The manager was foxy Ned Hanlon. He had premiered as a player in 1880 with the NL Cleveland Blues and had a decent 13-year playing career, batting .260 lifetime. Base stealing statistics, which weren't kept until halfway into Hanlon's career in 1886, indicate that he was quick on the base pass, stealing 329 bags in just 6 years. Though at the time when a runner advanced by an extra base on the hit, it was considered a steal. He had previously managed with little success in Pittsburgh, both with the Pirates and the Burghers of the Players League when he arrived in Baltimore in 1892. Catcher Wilbert Robinson joined the club in 1890. A solid backstop, Robinson had never hit above .244 prior to Hanlon's arrival and had finished 1891 batting a horrendous .216. Obviously inspired by his new skipper, he hit over 300 4 times in the 6 years after Hanlon took over the club. Joe Kelly began 1892 with the Pirates, but in September he was traded to Baltimore for George Van Hultren. Beginning in 1893, Kelly hit over 300, 13 seasons in a row, including a blistering 393 in 1894. Amazingly, Kelly came in 6th that season in the batting race. Fellow Irishman Hugh Duffy paced the circuit with a historic 440 mark. The final piece of this wrecking crew was John McGraw. In a 16-year playing career, he was an on-base machine. He led the league in OBP 3 times and broke the 500 mark 3 times, meaning that every other time John McGraw stepped up to bat, he got on base. He was the quintessential example of the hardscrabble player, barreling and brawling on his way to home base. There's more on McGraw, but I'm going to jump ahead. When do you want me to stop talking?
Another few minutes, Ralph. You're doing great. Very
All
enjoyable.
right. Let me jump to Rube Marquard. His is an interesting one. I'll tell you why. Rube Marquard is buried in Baltimore Hebrew Cemetery in Baltimore. Pitcher Rube Marquard won 200 games, including more than 20 games in a season 3 times and 19 straight wins in 1912, still a record. He also led the league in wins that season with an impressive 26 victories. His period of sustained excellence was brief, however, and many attribute his election to the Hall to his role in Lawrence Ritter's outstanding oral history of the early 20th century entitled The Glory of Their Times. Marquard has the dubious distinction of appearing in 5 separate World Series, 1911 through 1913 with the Giants, as well as 1916 and 1920 with Brooklyn, and never being a part of a championship team. He is the only Hall of Famer buried in a Jewish cemetery, despite not being a Jew. He and his wife, Jane Hecht Guggenheimer, considered themselves Christians, but chose to be buried near her family, who were Jewish. There's an interesting little thing about Rube's stone, too. If you take a close look, you can see they got his birth date wrong on the initial inscription. They said that he was born in 1879. It was really 1889. Let's see, who else is an interesting one? Roger Bresnahan. There's Buck Ewing. Oh, Ross Youngs. Let me talk about Youngs. His is an interesting one because of where he is buried. Does anyone know what important United States historical landmark is very close to Ross Youngs?
Alamo.
The Alamo. They're buried at Mission Park Cemetery in San Antonio. Ross Youngs and Rube Waddell. After a brief visit to the near silent Alamo grounds, I drove the rest of the way to Mission Park South. With a chapel, 3 funeral homes, 2 mortuaries, and 3 cemeteries, Mission Park has death in San Antonio covered. Youngs is buried in Section 3 and Waddell in Section 5, just a few hundred yards from each other. Waddell played his final game 7 years before Youngs made his debut in 1917, and the men had few similarities in personality or habit. Youngs was from Shiner, Texas, and is the sole native San Antonian in the Hall. He was generous, serious about his sport, which also included golf, and respectful, making him a favorite of his manager, John McGraw. He hit better than 309 of the 10 years he played, 7 of them consecutively. He was a model of consistency. Waddell was born in Pennsylvania and has become better known for his flights of fancy than for his play. He was odd, often disappearing for days at a time mid-season to go fishing. He drank often, married frequently, and was known to climb into the stands during a game, sometimes to beat up a spectator and sometimes to find the exit so he could chase a passing fire truck. He was also the most lights-out pitcher of his generation, leading the American League in strikeouts 6 years in a row. His fastball was lightning, and he had an incredible curve to match. Despite the differences, there is a poignancy to the two of them ending up buried in the same cemetery, as there is a similarity to their ultimate fates. Youngs contracted kidney disease, which was then called Bright's disease, and died before his 30th birthday, making him the shortest-lived member of the Hall of Fame. Waddell contracted pneumonia while stacking sandbags against a flooding river in Hickman, Kentucky. His already abused immune system failed him, ultimately leading to tuberculosis. Connie Mack and fellow A's owner Ben Scheib paid for Waddell's medical expenses and placed him in a sanitarium in San Antonio, where his family had settled. He died at 37. Both perished too young, and as a result, their final statistical totals do not measure up to some other Hall of Famers. It took 36 years after Waddell's final major league game and 45 years for Youngs for their respective veterans committees to elect them into the Hall. And then one more, just because Mr. Quickie sent that email.
Oh, Mel Ott. Oh,
So Mel Ott is buried at Metairie Cemetery in New Orleans. Mel Ott was born on the southern side of the Mississippi in Gretna, the parish seat of Jefferson Parish, separated from the French Quarter of New Orleans only by the famous river. A prodigy, Ott was playing for semi-pro teams, earning an adult salary as a 14-year-old boy. It was playing for one of those semi-pro teams that brought him to the attention of John McGraw. That was how the country boy from Nolans became one of the greatest hitters in the history of New York City. Ott played for the Giants for 22 years. In that time, he twice led the league in runs scored, 6 times led the league in home runs, 6 times led the league in walks, and retired with a lifetime batting average of .304 and an on-base percentage of .414. The Giants made the World Series 3 times in his career, winning it all in 1933. Ott batted .389 in the series that year, clubbing 2 home runs with 4 RBIs as the Giants beat the Senators in 5 games. He died on November 21st, 1958, from injuries sustained during an automobile accident on a foggy night in Mississippi. My November 21st is also my birthday, which is also the birthday of 2 Hall of Famers who were born in the same town. Who was it?
Ken Griffey Jr. and Stan Musial.
Correct. Congratulations, sir. You win the prize, which is my admiration. So those are some of the New York Giants. There were more, but you know, I could honestly talk to you forever. And if I were to expand the list beyond guys who had major careers with the Giants, there's what, like 60 Giants in the Hall of Fame, and 45 of those were New York Giants, right? So I could go on forever.
Ralph, first of all, the book, what an interesting topic. Great. What's the best way to get the book?
You can get it from Amazon, or you can email me. I make more money if you email me, but Amazon will get it to you cheaper and faster. So it's your call.
And on a side note, I just want to thank you for adapting the program.
Sure.
You know, to the Giant side. I got one quick question to ask you.
Sure.
I'm sorry. So you're telling us you love cemeteries.
I do.
So I know you, the book was published in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the Hall of Famers you got holding the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those Hall of Famers have since perished.
They have several of them.
For your own edification, do you think about going with, or you don't have the ball anymore, but at least going to the cemetery to where they are now interned?
Yeah, so that's part of the story. Is I do in the end of the book donate the ball. I will. I'm going to spoil it, but the book is 4 years old, so that's your fault for not reading it sooner. It does not get the Hall of Fame does not accept my donation. The Hall of Fame declines for reasons of their own. But I eventually did find a museum that was interested in the ball and donated it to them. So I don't have it anymore. And the answer to your question is no. Specifically the idea of visiting the living guys that I already got while they were alive and then getting them now that they've passed. No, that I wouldn't do. I've already taken their picture, imbued their energy into the ball, as it were. Perhaps as a retirement project 20 years down the road, I might ask the museum that has it for it back, and I'll go and visit the new graves, maybe. I don't know, or not, because I've done this and finished and moved on. When I chose to stop doing the project in 2018. At the time, there were 323 members of the Hall of Fame. I had photographed 318 of them. All of the ones who had died, there were 5 living Hall of Famers that I did not get to. And so but I had decided at that point that I didn't want to do this anymore. As I'm sure all of you surmised relatively early in the description of this, this is a project that could go on ad infinitum, because there's always new Hall of Famers every year, right? I can just keep adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. But the honest truth was, as much fun as I had traveling all over the country and seeing all of these incredible little tiny corners of the United States that I would not have seen otherwise, I would never have gone to Cuba without this project. Like, it was absolutely incredible, the opportunities that visiting the graves offered up for me in terms as a writer and a storyteller and just as a traveler of this earth, right? But the process of waiting for the living guys by the end got very tedious and boring, and I just did not want to do it anymore. I got very fortunate in that I got the help of the promoters of the baseball card shows. So there's only I took, I think it's like 73, 74 photographs of living Hall of Famers. And I think I only paid for like 3 or 4 of those photographs. Most of the photographs I got for free, because what I did was befriend the producers, the sponsors of the baseball card shows. And what they would do is, after the Hall of Famers were done on the floor, signing things for everybody, and they came in the back and were waiting for their ride to the airport, I would be able to sneak into the back and slide in and take my photograph. But that process involved a lot of waiting. There was a lot of waiting, and quite honest, there was a lot of waiting spent around people who were not always on their best behavior. And to be honest, it wasn't the kids, it was like guys our age, right? Who like took a lot of, felt very entitled to autographs and things like that, and were very aggressive about getting them. And it got to be a group of people that I started to see the same characters over and over again. And these were people that I would not actually want to spend my free time with. So I just reached a point where I didn't want to do that anymore. I was done. So I decided that with the class of 2018, that 2018 was the year I got the final photograph of a grave. And once I had completed that portion of the project where I had gotten all of the deceased players, I decided that 2018 was the last year I was going to chase after the living guys. And whoever I didn't get by the end of the World Series of 2018, I didn't get. And in the end, that was 5 out of 323. There is not a what is that, like a 990 percentage? There is not a baseball statistic in the world that a 990 percentage isn't really good. So
wonderful. Just
I don't
wonderful
even regret that.
presentation. Really enjoyed it. Jim
Thank
Weber, you are up. Jim? Unmute, Jim.
Ralph, great presentation. I just wanted to add one thing.
Yeah.
During my time here in Alaska, we have had the pleasure in the late 80s, mid 80s, of having Emmett Ashford come and umpire our games. He did it for 3 seasons.
Wow,
And
that's great.
To say that Emmett Ashford was an actor, he was the best. I'll tell you. We could have a baseball game going on and could be a little light in entertainment, not too much going on, pretty dull. Well, he had a way of just enlivening the crowd. And one of those ways was, I learned early on in going and listening to him call these games, because he was a legitimate umpire then. If you got a chance to sit behind home plate and you were able to discuss openly his ability at calling balls and strikes in a nice way, but you did it out loud, eventually he would stop the game and he'd come back and he'd talk to you about it. he would deliver to you a berating that was absolutely wonderful. And I had that happen to myself once. And after the game, I was able to shake hands with him and thank him for it, because he would bring the crowd to its knees with the way he talked. And then he would go and call the game. but he was just a dynamite guy, and I thought I would add that to your conversation.
Yeah,
Super.
for sure. He was quite a character. He's one of those, it's the umpire's job is you're not supposed to notice the umpire, but Emmett was different. He was a different sort. You didn't mind that you noticed Emmett. The funny thing about his ashes being buried in the cemetery in Cooperstown, his wife sent them, as I mentioned, his wife sent them to the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame didn't know they were coming. They just showed up in the mail. And at first, the Hall of Fame had no idea what to do with them. They sat on them for a few years because, like, what do we do with this? And then eventually, one of the presidents of the Hall of Fame died and was buried in Lakewood Cemetery. And he left enough money for there to be an additional plot, and Ashford was buried near him. So that was how Ashford was eventually interred. He spent a considerable amount of time just sitting on a shelf in the Hall of Fame with them wondering what to do with him.
Thank you, Jim. Mars, you're up.
Oh, you're still muted, Mars.
Hey.
There you
Ralph, that was so different than any meeting we've ever had. So I have some queries, and I'll throw in one quip. Going to all those cemeteries, did you find it a dying business?
No. Are you
Now
kidding? People are dying to get in.
Well, here are my questions now. When did the Grey Cup precede the Temple Cup? What year?
I would have to look that up. I don't know that off the top of my head.
But it did precede it, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. The other one of the other questions I have, I was under the impression, not that it really matters, that Christy Mathewson did graduate and received a degree, but you said he dropped out. That's correct.
Well, I mean, I would have to, let me go back and check, but he was out by 1901, right? He was pitching by 1901. So he would have had to have graduated in 2 years, which I guess, Mathewson was kind of brilliant. It's possible that he did, but that would have been an extraordinary feat.
So he never went back to school to get his degree.
I don't think so.
Okay. It's not really that important.
Yeah.
But just point of view, I don't know.
Sure.
Now, did any Hall of Fame New York Giants or San Francisco Giants ever make it to the century mark?
Live to be 100?
Yes.
No Hall of Famer has lived to be 100 yet.
None throughout the entire hall.
Correct. No one who has lived in the hall. Now, there are several of them, especially these days, who are living into their 90s. But no Hall of Famer has lived to, at least as of 2018. I would have to go. I have to be honest. After I finished the project, I kind of stepped back from the Hall of Fame a little bit. The Hall of Fame can become a very obsessive conversation for us baseball fans, and it started to be, because of the book and because of my interest in everything, it started to be all anybody wanted to talk to me about. So I kind of faded away, and I don't actually pay as close of attention to who gets elected into the Hall of Fame every year anymore. So I'm not sure, what's happened in the last 5 years. But as of 2018, no one had lived to 100. Tommy Lasorda got close. I think Lasorda was like 96 or 97 or something like that. But no one has lived to 100 yet.
Wow. My last question is, when you were in Cuba, did you happen to go to an Industriales game?
I did go to an industrial. I went to several games. The first trip that I went out to Cuba was with a tour called Cuba Ball, which was hosted by Kit Krieger, who lives in Vancouver. It was Canadian. So, that made it easier the first trip out to Cuba. The first time I went out, things were still a little, things still are a little. It was a little bit harder to get in the country the first time I went. The second time I went, Obama had opened up the borders quite a bit and had loosened a lot of that. So the second time was super easy. I just walked into JFK, jumped on a plane, and went. But the first time I went, that hadn't happened yet. I had to fly to Mexico to get there, and it was with this Cuban group. But part of that tour, I don't know how many folks are aware of how baseball works in Cuba, how the season works in Cuba. There are 15 provinces. Each province has its own team. Plus there's one other team thrown in there to make it a nice even 16. Those 16 teams, for one representing each province, plays the first half of the baseball season. Then they take a break in the middle, and that season begins in like September, October. because you can't play baseball in July in Cuba. It's just too damn hot.
Well, when I was there,
Uh-huh.
it was in November,
Yeah.
and they were playing,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
was staying in a neighborhood in a private home. They
Mhm.
had all the TV set had the game on. I was
Mhm.
playing outside in the street with the kids that didn't have, they had a palm for a glove from a palm
Yeah,
tree,
yeah, yeah.
and we were playing.
Different. It's different. Yeah, yeah.
It was a blast playing with those kids.
Yeah, yeah. It's the one Latin American country where soccer, football, is not king, not yet. Baseball is still the dominant sport.
Puerto Rico too, isn't that so?
Yeah,
Puerto
yeah, but
Rico?
that's not a Latin American country. That's part of the United States.
Oh yeah.
What about the Dominican?
Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah,
That was great.
Ralph,
Yeah.
how are you for time?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay, good. Howard Manis, you're up.
Excellent presentation, Ralph. I'm also
Thanks.
interested in cemeteries. I've seen a few of the graves, Babe Ruth and
Mhm.
Lou Gehrig and one or two others. I just want to make a comment on the very first tombstone you showed, Walsh. Now, Mickey, who I was unfamiliar with, he was the ball player, right?
Mhm.
Mickey Walsh. Now, I was reading the stone because it was up there on the screen a long time. I saw John Walsh. That was his dad, right? His father.
Yeah.
I noticed he was born in Tipperary, Ireland, I
Correct.
believe it was.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was there a week ago. I was on vacation in Ireland, and we were in
You were
Tipperary.
in Tipperary. That is
So
hilarious.
I just had to mention that to you. I mean, I had no inkling that anybody, the father of a baseball Hall of Famer,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
born
is
there,
from
or
there,
anybody.
yeah.
It's a beautiful country.
The
But
that era that I write about this in the book, particularly in the chapter in Massachusetts, that era was the Irish influence, because baseball is always a reflection of the immigrant story in the United States, right?
Mhm.
That era was the era where the Irish were coming over in great droves, and baseball, you saw a reflection of that in baseball. There were a lot of those 1870s, 1880s, 1890s guys who were either from Ireland directly or whose parents were from Ireland.
well, of course, we went to a museum that had to do with the potato famine and all the people who came to America because of the famine.
Mhm.
And then even the Titanic stopped there. It made its
Yeah.
final stop picking up people.
Huh.
And then a couple of days later, it hit the iceberg. But I just kind of freaked out a little reading that stone. Tipperary, I was there like 5 days ago,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is why I wasn't here last week, Gary. I was
Yeah,
traveling the
another
world.
thing that I don't know if you noticed on Mickey's stone, but it doesn't actually say Walsh, it says Welch.
Welsh, was it?
Yeah, it was spelled differently, but yeah.
Okay. I don't have my reading glasses on. I didn't even
Uh,
read it that well.
Yeah.
But it was just a coincidence that I was there a week ago. And by the way, baseball there, I mean, couldn't find it anywhere. I saw a lot of
Not in
rugby games
Ireland,
on
no.
TV. So rugby, soccer, but I had my cell phone. I was able to keep up with the major leagues, with the Mets and other teams. And there was a guy on my tour, by the way, if everybody here were baseball fans, who were Giant fans. I know you guys are kind of down on the team right now. There was a guy on my tour last week who proudly walked around with a Chicago White Sox hat. So you guys could have it worse. The Giants are still in the race for the wild card, I guess, somewhat. But and the Mets barely are hanging on too. But there was a guy with a White Sox hat, and he was very proud of it. We were all goofing on him, by the way. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dave Littman, you're up.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, you
Yes.
are.
Okay, Ralph, I want to thank you. That was a great presentation.
Thank
I
you.
got the book, as you
Oh,
see.
excellent.
Yeah, I got it at Sabre in Minneapolis, and
Oh, excellent.
I started reading it immediately. I think my favorite part was your interactions with the living Hall of Famers, because they ranged from respectful to what the hell is this guy doing?
Yes, there were
What?
for those who haven't read the book, every Hall of Famer is a unique individual, and each one of them had a unique reaction to me. And for some of them, it was no big deal that I was asking. I explained to each of them what I was doing. I got it narrowed down to like a 45-second speech where I could describe what the project was and what my intention was before I asked for the photograph. And some of them just were like, okay, take the picture, I guess. Like, there was almost, for a lot of them, it was a very quick interaction. There wasn't a whole lot going on, but some of them thought I was crazy. Yeah. Some of them thought I was off my rocker. And then some of them thought it was great. Some of them thought it was a blast. Lou Brock. One of the ones I had the most fun with was Lou Brock, because for most of them, they didn't care. They just wanted me to take the picture and walk away. But Lou Brock wanted to be sure that he looked good. So I took the picture, and then he wanted to look at the picture. He's like, no, my hair's messed up. Take it from this angle. So I ended up spending like 10 minutes with Lou Brock and took like 40 photographs because I had to pick the one he liked the best. You know, some of them were a lot of fun like that.
So I have a two-part question. First off, did any of them find out about the book once it came out? And
the one person that the one Hall of Famer that I was actually able to give a copy of the book to was Ryan Sandberg, because he was in not this past summer, but the couple of summers before that. I was always in Cooperstown for induction weekend, selling books and baseball cards at a table in the parking lot. And he came by at one point, and I gave him a copy of the book. So I know Ryan Sandberg's got it. I don't know if any of the others did.
How did he take it? Getting the
he thought it was fun. He thought it was great. He didn't remember. He didn't remember taking the photograph, of course. Like I don't expect many of them to, but he thought, you know, when I explained the whole thing to him, he thought it was fun.
These guys spend their whole lives now. Their main source of income is posing for pictures with balls, cards, bats, people. So I'm not surprised he wouldn't remember. My other question is, I see you live at 151st Street, which is, of course, not only is that Polo Grounds old neighborhood, it's my father's old neighborhood.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And my brother's present neighborhood, so I'm up there a lot. So my question to you is, how can I come up and get my copy personally inscribed, since you live
so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to, in the chat, where is the chat? There's the chat. I'm gonna put my email address in the chat.
Wait, you're a SABR member, are you not?
I am a SABR member.
Okay, so am I. I'm the treasurer of the Casey Stengel chapter.
Okay, great. So you can check that out. I'm a member of the Stengel chapter. I'm sure my contact info is in there. Shoot me an email, and I will figure out a time to meet up.
Yeah, because I'm up there. I'm up there pretty constantly. This is between you. I may as well tell you guys all this anyway. My brother has colon cancer, so I'm up there a lot.
No.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm up there a lot to do my part to take care of him. He's a gigantic baseball fan too. 3 generations with the Giants and the Yankees. So whenever I can come up, I'll be delighted to bring the book along. And
shoot me an email. We'll figure it out.
Okay, I'll take that in a few minutes.
All right. Bill Clank, and then Paul.
Let Paul go first. I'd like to go last.
Paul.
Okay, I guess I'll step in and relieve him. Hi, Ralph. That was really cool. The guy who's also done a lot of family history work and going through cemeteries. It really is a lot of fun. Finding out where these people are and what their stones look like and where they're buried. My question is fairly, these are both fairly easy questions. One is, how is your book organized? Is it organized by Hall of Famer, the year they were, by chronology in terms of when they were inducted? Is it done by states? How did you organize?
It's largely done by the states where they are buried, because that's largely, and it is largely chronological, not exactly. There were some times when I had to go back and forth, and in the interest of telling a clean story, I sewed some stuff together. But it's mainly organized by states. There's a few chapters that are a little different, right? The living Hall of Famers are organized differently in the book, and there's also one of the most fun chapters, in my opinion, is one called the Symbolic Ones. There are roughly 20 Hall of Famers who do not have graves. They were cremated, or they were lost at sea. Everyone knows who that one is, right? So there's there were a few for whom there was no place for me to go to take a photograph, so I had to come up with something unique and clever. My favorite one of those was actually Al Barlick, the umpire Al Barlick, who was cremated. I went and found Al Barlick umpired his first game as a member of his his mining team. He was a coal miner. His dad was a coal miner, and he was a coal miner. And the first game he ever umpired was a game for that coal mining team. And so I went to Springfield, Illinois, where he lived, and I found the last remaining physical structure from that coal mine. There's still one shaft that has the wooden structure around the opening to it. So I went and found that one structure and took Al Barlick's photograph there. So that chapter, the one I call the Symbolic Ones, is a lot of fun, because I look for unique ways of telling the stories of the guys who don't have graves for me to visit.
if you're the only other one I would suggest, if you've never been to, is to see Shoeless Joe Jackson's grave. I know he wasn't in the Hall of Fame.
He wasn't. I visited Shoeless Joe Jackson's grave because
cool.
he was in between. I had gone to Ty Cobb's grave, and then I was heading to an island off of the coast of South Carolina. So on the way, we passed through Greenville, which is where Shoeless Joe Jackson was buried. And the really great thing about Shoeless Joe, I talk about this in the book too, people leave things at the graves, stones, coins, baseballs, shoes, whatever, right? People leave stuff at the graves. Obviously, the grave that had the most stuff left on it was Babe Ruth. But second to the Babe was Shoeless Joe Jackson. Even though he wasn't a Hall of Famer, we were in Greenville. I wanted to go and visit him. I stopped and visited his grave, and it was covered in offerings. It was absolutely fascinating to see.
Yeah, it was. Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you.
Sure.
Bill, Karen. Bill?
Yes, thank you. Ralph, that was a great presentation. I enjoyed it very much. I wanted to ask you if you got a chance to visit Jackie Robinson's grave in Cypress Cemetery.
I have visited Jackie Robinson's grave several times. I'm a New Yorker, and Jackie is. I think it was mentioned in the bio that Gary sent around to everybody. I've in addition to the Hall Ball, I've edited another book that's called Not an Easy Tale to Tell, Jackie Robinson on the Page, Stage, and Screen. That's a Saber book where we look at fictionalizations of Jackie. That takes my two worlds, my world of theater and the arts and baseball, and it looks at them together, and it looks at the way art has shaped our perspective of Jackie and the way we remember him. I'm a big Jackie guy. I actually, at 151st Street here, live right on Jackie Robinson Park, which is one of the most exciting things for me. Yes, I have been to Jackie's grave multiple times. I've paid catch at Jackie's grave. Jackie is someone I visit just on the way home from work because I want to stop and visit Jackie. I see him often.
And also, I wanted to mention that you forgot to mention Dominican Republic. There are more Dominican-born players in the major league.
Sure, but I'm curious.
Country.
And yeah, baseball, I suppose that's true.
And baseball is the biggest sport in Dominican Republic.
Yeah, for sure.
Cuba.
You are correct. You are correct.
Southern Cuba.
You are correct.
Thank you, Bill. All right, we're gonna wind it up with Bill Quinn. Bill?
I'm a little nervous that you wanted to go last. I'm afraid of what's coming.
No. It's not. It has nothing to do with you. I think it's a fairly simple and forthright 2 questions I'm going to give you. But I'm asking Gary for if I can have 2 minutes at the end to extend my comments. Gary? Okay. All right. Question is one: are any of these guys? And I apologize. I had a doctor's appointment. I was late in joining the affair here. Are any of these guys buried, say, less than a mile from where they lived? You know, their actual home.
Yeah. Several of them are. It wasn't until the players of the 70s, and keep in mind, a lot of the 70s and 80s guys haven't passed yet. But prior to that, a lot of them were buried near where they lived. And for a lot of them, that was near where they played. Because that was a time when guys stayed with teams longer. They made homes in these cities. So they when they died, they were buried near their homes, which were near where they played. That was extraordinarily common.
And the second part of that, are any of them buried on streets that or roads, whatever, that bear some resemblance, connection to baseball?
Catfish Hunter is buried in his high school baseball fields, like, far right field is basically where Catfish Hunter is buried. Trying to think. In the symbolic ones, there's three guys who were cremated and had their ashes spread on baseball fields. Early Wynn had his spread on the diamond in Cleveland. Ron Santo had his spread at Wrigley, and I am blanking on the one here. Hold on one quick sec. I will tell you. Stand by. I got this. I know where to find
I
this.
didn't want to give you a stumper question here, but I guess I did.
Yeah, you did. Hold on, I got this. I know what this is. Dick Williams. Dick Williams had his ashes spread at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown.
The reason I ask, just a personal aside here, my wife and I have selected a cemetery, which is about a quarter of a mile from our home, walking distance. So therefore, if I die first, she doesn't have any excuse. Hey, Bill, it was too far to go.
If you're too far away, that's very cute. I like that.
Walk it. And the second is, we're going to be buried. Now, I'm not a Yankee fan, but that's what I got stuck with here. I'm going to, and my wife and I will both be buried on Del Webb Boulevard.
That's funny. That's funny.
In Sun City, it's one of the main streets.
Funny. I mentioned at the beginning that Henry Chadwick had a really fun grave. I don't describe it because I describe it later in the book, but I'll tell you all. His grave, the borders of his grave, the four borders of his grave are baselines. And each corner of the plot has a little stone baseball, a bag, base at the corner. And they even have, because it was what the style was when Chadwick died, the bags even have the little tie downs that used to hold the stones for the corner. You have the little tie downs that used to hold bags down. His stone pretty much stands near where home plate would be. His grave is a lot of fun. It's adorable. He made it baseball.
Well, what I'm going to tell you isn't a lot of fun, but I'm going to ask Gary. Gary sent me and all of you a note that next month is
Bill. I think the best thing to do, I'd like to say goodbye to Ralph, and then we can get back to you because.
Okay, I apologize.
No, don't apologize. We spoke about this when you were at the doctor. So I want you to speak, but I want at least leave off with Ralph since it's his night. So let's just say goodbye to Ralph.
It was wonderful talking to you all.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Here again is the book.
Gary's got my contact info if you
anybody needs anything. Really, Ralph, very different and fabulous.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph.
We will meet again in 2 weeks on September 12th with John Leonidakis. Until then, I'm going to shut the recording off. I hope a lot of you stay here as Bill wants to address the group. But happy Labor Day to everybody. And Ralph, again.
Thank you.
Great job.
Bye, everybody.